Welcome to the afternoon panel on scaling innovations to get millions learning. We have a really fantastic group of panelists to discuss this topic, ranging from policy to research to practice. And I won't introduce them in a lot of detail. They'll talk about their work through answering the questions. And we also hope that we'll have a very lively discussion with all of you. So we'll get it started with a few questions and then invite everyone else to jump in. So very briefly, Rebecca Winthrop, Senior Fellow from the Brookings Institute, and the Brookings Institute's study on millions learning is kind of a guiding thread that leads through this panel and many of the topics we'll touch upon. Wendy Kopp, co-founder and CEO from Teach for All. Urvashi Sani, Study Hall in India, a fantastic teacher education project. And Claudia Costin, Global Director for Education from the World Bank, but will also be speaking about her experience with the municipality of Rio in Brazil. So thank you for joining us. Scaling innovations. A big question is often, when we talk about scaling, people focus on quantity. And we want to start the discussion with a reflection on what is it that we want to scale, and especially with respect to quality. So I would invite maybe Rebecca to start reflecting on when we're thinking about scaling quality, what does that mean in your context? What have you seen in the research that you've done over the last few years, case studies all around the world? So please get us started.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. As Philipp said, we have an initiative at Brookings called Millions Learning, which is both a research initiative, but also shortly, once the research is completed, to be an outreach and dialogue catalyst initiative. And we absolutely invite all of you to give us suggestions on how to do that or engage in it once the research is done. But just to give you a little bit of background, as Philipp said, about scaling impact. What are we talking about when we talk about scaling? Why do we, as Brookings, why did we come up on this topic? Why do we care about it? We had a couple of questions in our mind. One was we're quite worried about a couple of big global education gaps. One being what I've been calling the 100-year gap, which is that education in terms of not only access to schooling, but completion of schooling and learning outcomes, at least around literacy, numeracy, and basic science, where we have comparable data, is about 100 years behind in the developing world as it is from the developed world. And if we keep doing as we're doing, it's projected to stay 100 years behind. And I'm happy to talk more about that if need be, maybe in the conversation. So that's one big gap that we're quite worried about. And another big gap in terms of looking at education globally is what a lot of people call the skills gap. And that really is a gap, I think, that is everywhere. And virtually every country in the world, it's a big gap that education systems in my country, in the United States, worry about, as well as countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which is that young people, even if they get into school, they finish it, are they coming out with the skills and competencies they need to be relevant for both the workplace? We heard a great panel yesterday about that, as well as to be a good global citizen and to continue learning throughout their lives. So those, for us, are two motivating gaps. And if you look at there's lots of people here at WISE doing incredibly creative things all around the world. But broadly speaking, the big effort that the global community has put into education has been about scaling access to schooling. And we have a pretty good recipe. It's been build schools, make them free, make them compulsory, and that has actually resulted, I would say the schooling model is actually a huge scaling success story. I mean, 200 years ago, there was about 2 million kids in school, and today we have 9 out of 10 kids are in school around the world. So the question is, they're in school, but what are they learning? And we haven't done such a good job of really scaling access to quality learning or scaling learning opportunities. And so that was really our fundamental question with the Millions Learning Project. And what we sought to do was, one, situate it within the Sustainable Development Goals, because the Sustainable Development, we started this before the Sustainable Development Goals, and the great hopes that the Sustainable Development Goals would have learning at its center in the education goal, which it does. And now the real question, I think, that people are coming to particularly if you look at governments around the world as well as people like all of you, is how do you scale learning? How could you do that? And we knew a couple of things. We know that understanding what works in education is very important. And we do actually do a lot of that research at Brookings, what works, but that's only 50% of what you need to know. The other 50% is how the process of scaling, how to scale. And that's what the Millions Learning Initiative was about.
Great, thank you. So maybe we'll jump to two examples of projects that have been successful and have scaled. Maybe we'll start with Urvashi. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work in India and how do you think about scale and quality in that context?
Thank you, Philip, and hello everyone. I'm glad to be at WISE. This is my first time and it's been very inspiring. Meeting so many people doing so many interesting things to scale their work. I live and work in India, in North India, in Lucknow actually, out in Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the most populous states and also one of the most backward ones. Our vision is to reach quality education to every child, rural, urban, girl, boy, especially abled, normally abled, and we have been working at it for 30 years. We have an outreach now of about 50,000 students and teachers, student teachers altogether all over India, in many parts of India, mainly Uttar Pradesh, but now Rajasthan, soon going into Haryana, Maharashtra, etc. In terms of what have we scaled, which was your question, and there again, when I'm here, my head is spinning. All I hear is millions, and I keep wondering, I said, God, how did they do the millions? And in India, there is no shortage of millions, many millions. And yet, we've only done the thousands. So I'm wondering what's wrong with us. But I think the reason why we've been treading very cautiously, because we are very, very wedded to the idea of quality and our special vision of that quality. We really believe we've built our whole foundation into what I call a universe of care, which is a place where teachers and students are mutually respected, they're responded to, they are cared for. And then secondly, we look at quality in a more holistic manner, where of course they must learn how to read, write and do math, but more importantly, they must learn how to live. So we look at life outcomes and they must learn how to live in very challenging circumstances. And I want to talk very briefly about our girls' education project, where girls come from very poor backgrounds and they face child marriage, domestic violence, sexual violence, and all kinds of discrimination at home, on the streets, in the workplace. They've dropped out. So when we got them, we realized that just giving access wasn't enough, but that we needed very much to teach them how to challenge their circumstances. Not just so, we built into our idea of quality education for girls, that they must learn, like they learn maths and science, that they must learn to see themselves as equal, autonomous persons and having full control over their lives, being able to do what they wanted to do with their lives. And that is a very complex idea to scale, especially in very patriarchal societies like India and many others like them. So we have gone very cautiously. We've used technology. We first did our experiment with our own, and there's about 1,000 girls now. We started with 30. And then we've used very simple, low cost, easy to use, easy to maintain, locally available technology to try and spread the word. And we've gone to 170 schools now, and in the next 3 years, we will be mapping over 1,000 schools, and that means reaching out to 100,000 girls with our work. So.
Great, and we'll certainly come back to the topic of technology, which you already mentioned. Claudia, let me skip you and we'll come back to you. Wendy, tell us a little bit about your work with Teach for All and what you have scaled and how you've thought about scaling and quality in your context.
What brings us to this topic is really a commitment. I mean, what brings everyone across the Teach for All network together is a commitment to ensuring that all kids have equal opportunity. That is a very lofty goal, far from where we are today. And I guess when we think about why it is that we don't have that world today, I mean, that reaching that goal requires a whole lot of not only access, but quality learning. We have millions of kids in classrooms who do not even get to basic literacy levels. So clearly that's why this topic is of import. I guess we believe we've got a big systemic challenge on our hands, that we can't fix any one thing in the picture and achieve equal opportunity for all kids. You know, we can't achieve that goal by, quote, fixing teachers or by giving all kids access to technology or by any one thing. And in fact, we think we're going to have to affect a lot of change really from every level of the education system and also outside of it. You know, we're going to have to ensure that our kids are coming to school with access to better nutrition and healthcare and early learning opportunity. There's so much to be done. And I think the question that keeps all of us across the Teach for All network up at night is, who is going to do all of this? In a world where in virtually every country we send our, quote, top talent, so the most educated recent college graduates and young professionals, the folks who people consider to be the most promising future leaders in their countries, we send them and their energy against basically everything but expanding opportunity for the most marginalized kids, like into finance and technology and medicine and law. I mean, almost everywhere but towards this very complex set of issues. And that's what each of the independent, locally led, governed, funded organizations, 38 of them and growing in 38 different countries in the Teach for All network, are working to change. And they're working to change that. Like some of you may have encountered Teach for Qatar here. You know, not a typical context for Teach for All organizations, which typically place their teachers with very high poverty student populations, but the educational levels here in Qatar are, in fact, at the level of, say, low-income kids in the U.S. And so they are recruiting local Qataris, some of the top graduates in the country, for the first time, you know, to say we are going to get them to commit 2 years to teach in local Qatari schools, and then we're going to cultivate their leadership so that they work for the systemic changes that we need to see here to improve educational outcomes overall. So that's kind of what brings us to the topic, I guess, of quality learning, just this belief that if we are going to achieve quality learning at scale, we're going to have to invest in the development of the leadership capacity in all these countries dedicated to taking that issue on.
Great. And we want to come back to you and learn more about how you've actually done that over really just a few years. Claudia, I want to shift gears a little bit. And Urvashi already said we have many millions in India. You already had many millions to work with in Rio. You decided that wasn't enough. You want to work with many billions at the World Bank. Wendy said it's not going to be enough to fix one piece of the system. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about enabling systems and what could governments do to enable innovation and scale?
Apparently we have rehearsed because the three others emphasized exactly the points that I think are important. It is about a system-wide approach. You don't transform education by fixing one element or just one element in isolation. When you look at what was approved in September by the UN General Assembly, the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically the Sustainable Development Goal 4, that says that we are committed that by 2030 to ensure that all girls and boys have equitable and inclusive access to quality education as expressed in learning outcomes and also lifelong opportunities for all. Yesterday in Paris, UNESCO approved, the ministers approved a framework for action for this. So it is a huge task if we don't want to just having some poetry there in words and nothing to happen. And we have to be optimistic because although the Millennium Development Goals are still an unfinished business, we didn't finish ensuring all the kids in schools, but we progressed a lot. Now there are still 58 million kids that are out of school, but when you compared, when they met, when countries met to set the targets for 2015, it's impressive what the world has achieved, as Rebecca has correctly emphasized. But what is there to be done now? It's the most challenging part. First, the kids that are hardest to reach. Then we are talking about children with disabilities. You are talking about the kids from nomadic tribes. We are talking about the kids that are even hidden in the slums of Rio de Janeiro. We found 3,000 that were not in schools, although we believed initially that everybody was. No, there were still many of them with disabilities because their parents were ashamed of them or something like that. But the most difficult thing is not even those hardest to reach. It's fixing education, ensuring that kids learn. And then we cannot be naive. It's very important to assess education, to know if kids are learning, and to provide feedbacks for teachers and for system leaders to show exactly what they are not learning. And what is in this context bringing up to scale? It is about public policy. It would be wonderful if just a bunch of NGOs could alone, in isolation, fix all the problems, but it's not feasible. It's not feasible. When I was in Rio, there were many NGOs working, bringing, very quickly this, working with deprived kids, 20 here, 30 there, some were more powerful, 150. But there were almost 1 million kids in the system. So if public policy doesn't work, and that means a system-wide approach, fixing curricula, defining a clear curricular guidelines, working with teachers, improving pre-service education, improving in-service education, ensuring that the best teachers goes to the most needy areas, like the work of the Teach for American Teach for All does. Just to give you some examples, we need to fix the whole system.
Claudia, this is thank you. This is a great segue, I think, back to Rebecca, because you take a very strong position that public policy and the government has to be part of the solution, because otherwise you can't reach scale. This morning in the panel on finance, we learned that there will be 900 million additional students hitting the education system at all levels over the next decade. And it's clear that the current system, even if we push more energy into it, are not going to be able to address this need. So there is the question of what are the new innovations? What are the really radical new ideas? And then how do we create pockets where those ideas can start, can grow, can gather evidence, and then connect them to this public policy that Claudia talked about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's one that actually the Millions Learning Initiative, in terms of the research we did just looked a lot at. But it's also, everyone on the panel, including you, Philipp, has a story to tell about it. So I encourage others also to weigh in, which is probably where you're going. But in terms of this idea of how you take an idea and bring it into the, scale it up, that's one of the things that we found in the Millions Learning research that we've been conducting. We had a couple, in terms of what the study is, if you don't mind, Philipp, I'll take a moment to just tell people a little bit about that research. There were a couple of gaps. I already talked to you about our motivation, what we cared about, but there's not a lot known about sort of the how to scale, particularly in low and middle income contexts. So that was our focus, and we also really focused on looking for examples where there was demonstrated improvements in learning outcomes. And learning outcomes, not just literacy and numeracy, but across sort of early childhood, perhaps some of the social emotional learning aspects. So early childhood, primary and secondary was the scope of our study. And one of the things it might be useful to talk about is just what does scale mean? And then I'll come to your question about sort of from the margins to the center. At Brookings has done a lot of research over the last 5 years on scaling, not just education, scaling in low and middle income countries across multiple sectors. And people who work on this topic, and we are certainly building off that research, but people who work on this topic have definitions of scaling. There's kind of 4 commonly held pathways of scale, and I wrote them down so I don't forget, but one is this idea of horizontal scaling, which means you have something and you increase in numbers or in geography. That's sort of a horizontal pathway to scale. One is a vertical pathway to scale, where you might have sort of an intervention and you deepen it, and it usually goes from sort of, an intervention that gets taken up into policy. So that's kind of a vertical approach. Another approach to scale, pathway to scale, is called organizational, which is you're really strengthening an organization to be more sustainable and have a greater impact and effectiveness and reach. And then the sort of 4th pathway to scaling that people talk about is functional, which is you're doing something and you start adding different activities and functions. So it's very complicated to wrap your mind around what is happening in terms of scale. And the things that we learned so far from this study, which will be launched in March, and actually everybody on the panel has been intimately involved in terms of on our advisory panel or engaged as one of the case studies, et cetera. We learned a couple of things. The first thing we learned, and we really did scan the world in these low-income contexts and middle-income countries, was that examples of scaling of improving learning that takes sort of a top-down system-wide approach, very, very, very few. We hardly found any. And Claudia is the exception when she was the Rio, head of Rio, and so we should talk to her about that. What we found mostly was that there were interesting new ideas, and they wouldn't actually necessarily be new, but they were effective interventions for improving learning outcomes that gained traction on the margins, and for one way or another, they were able to be scaled up through one or a combination of those pathways. And there was usually sort of 3 reasons why they were able to be scaled up. It was kind of a special sauce. One is that the practitioners or the social entrepreneurs or the people who were doing the intervention really had in mind at the get-go that they would like to scale. So the cost of the intervention was one that was actually feasible to expand. It wasn't so costly per child that from any sort of economic standpoint, you could never replicate it. The second was people really were good about what we end up calling flexible adaptation, which is basically you decide what is the core part of your intervention. This is what people who are successful did. What is the core part of your intervention? What is the quote-unquote sacred cows? Like, what can you not do without? And what can be adapted to context? And that is a really nice sweet spot. It's kind of in between wholesale replication, which is take my model to the T everywhere, and a much more costly sort of very contextualized, nuanced contextualization, which is very costly and intensive. This sort of flexible adaptation. So those were a couple of things that the innovators did. So you had those type of innovations. And then the third thing that they did really well was being very opportunistic about political moments when there was a sort of political opportunity. That's on the innovator side. The second group was on the funder side, the financing side. And the things that when it worked, funders provided longer-term support, so not just year tranches, so long, multi-year support, and they provided funding for core support. We actually saw a lot of examples where funders didn't do that and things couldn't scale. And so we can come back to this if you want to talk about financing, but this...
Actually, I'd love to almost segue to Wendy, because I know she cares about exactly that point. So
okay, so we'll hold that. So we'll come back to the funding thing. And then the third sort of element in the special sauce is you had governments who had very clear goals. So there was a political vision and movement, but were much more flexible and open about how those goals were achieved, and could sort of hence absorb a lot of these innovations that were kind of at the margins and bring them to the center.
I think that's a really useful framework to understand and also plan for scale. But Wendy, I wanted to hear from you a little bit. Did you, when you started to Teach for America, did you plan to be in 38, is it 38 countries now? To be in 38 countries? No. And also, maybe, I know we've had a conversation about funding and finance, and how do you finance something that looks pretty different than what you're used to, and then how do you make sure that that doesn't just remain an innovative, interesting pilot, but it becomes something that actually affects the system? So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. No, I had no thought that this would end up in any other country, actually, and I wasn't thinking about other countries, although maybe I should have been. But I had my head down, and I was just focused on what is a really serious problem in our own country, the radical inequities of outcomes based on kids' economic and racial backgrounds. But there was something in the water in the rest of the world 10 years ago, and it has sent me and my colleagues on a learning journey on this question of how you scale something. So 10 years ago, within 1 year, I had met 13 incredible, committed people from 13 different countries, from India to Lebanon to China to Chile to the next place, who were just determined to do something similar to what we were doing in the US and what Teach First was doing in the UK in their countries. And they were coming looking for help, and that led to ultimately the launch of Teach for All. And what we've come to over time, actually it fits right in your flexible adaptation bucket. We've just come to see, and there's so many different things that led us to this, but that we believe that scaling with quality, like our particular model, will come from two things working together, neither of which we think you can do without. One is you've got to have strong local leadership with a true ownership and vision for adapting this into their context. Like, they have to be driving this, and they have to have the freedom and flexibility to figure out how to make that happen. We do have, like, your core, we have, maybe 8 unifying principles that you've got to be working to live into, but what that looks like is going to be different in each context. So you have to have that. At the same time, it doesn't make sense for each person in all these different countries pursuing the same big idea to be reinventing all the wheels, right? Like, so the second thing you've got to have is the capacity to learn from across contexts. And the thing that has been so striking for me and my colleagues all across the network is how similar the root issues of educational inequity are. Like, they are so similar, and the silver lining, the solutions are shareable. And so we've built a global center that enables us to capture the kind of principles, not like this is a tool that's cool, everyone should use this, but here's the principle that undergirds why these organizations are successful in one thing or another. So we've built a global center that enables us to spread the learnings and to foster direct connections across the network, and to access some global resources and basically contribute to the leadership development, the capacity development of these organizations. And my quick thought on the financing, again, parallels Rebecca's finding, which is, we've found that there's actually quite a bit of support. There needs to be more, but there are a lot of people who want to improve their local or national education systems. There are precious few who think it makes sense to fund this core capacity at the global center because it seems like overhead and whatever the rationale is. And I just think without investing more there, we will not have scaling with quality to the extent that we have the potential to have.
Urvashi, I'm sure you could comment on all of this, but I want to ask you a question specific to technology. Often when we talk about scale, the immediate association is technology. And if you consider education an industry, and you look at pretty much all the other industries around the world that have seen tremendous scale, it's been driven by technology and innovation. And in education, there's kind of this, on one hand, there's a group of people who say technology is going to fix everything and everyone's going to learn just with these devices and we can replace all the schools. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people who say technology is the enemy and it has to be personal and get the computers out of the classroom. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you have used technology in a really thoughtful way and what you think is the role of technology in scaling innovation.
Thank you, Philip. I do have comments on the rest, but I'll hold them. In terms of how we've used technology, as I told you, that the first thing was to keep it, to your point, keep it affordable, cost-effective, locally available, locally usable. So what we did was we started in 2005 using technology to scale all our work, because like you, we hadn't started with the idea of scaling across geographies and nationally. So we did a very simple thing that we felt that, first of all, because we have such a holistic approach and our view to quality is so holistic, we had to capture everything. It couldn't be a teacher writing on a board. Like it had to be the whole classroom. So the simple idea was to take a handy cam, to take someone who you could train very easily, put them in a class with the best teacher with the students who are like the students that you're trying to reach out, the same target population, so that they don't come with this huge cultural capital that immediately changes their response. And to map out the government-mandated curriculum so that they're getting all the basics that they're supposed to get, and to put it in small units of 15 minutes, 30 minutes. You map it out, and we mapped out the whole curriculum up to class 8. And we've mapped out all our critical dialogues, the critical feminist pedagogy that we put. And then we believe that it has to be a project that's by teachers, for teachers, and from teachers too. And then through the students, and we've reached out to the community, because to your point, Wendy, it has to be a very holistic model. It has to include many people and many things. Then we built a small model of how you train teachers. People don't watch videos by just watching them, learn by watching videos, but you have to put in a mediation where the teacher is actively engaged in partnering with the model teacher in the video, and then simulating the same activity that's happening in the classroom. And what they learn, we ask the teachers, what do you see? Do you see how are they interacting with each other? What is the kind of respectful response to the children? How are the children engaged? How are they speaking about it? And especially with complicated topics like in terms of feminist pedagogy, teachers are terrified. They don't know how to approach it. But when they see a dynamic model of how simply a teacher using simple drama, simple activities can touch very sensitive topics, she says, yeah, I can do this. And then we teach them also how they might speak to parents and make them their allies in this whole thing. So what is happening is that we're amplifying the voices of the girls who are speaking in those videos and reaching out to many people. And we're also amplifying the voices of the teachers to take them to the community. And we're trying to have a two-way street where the teachers in the field then can use simple mobile phones to video their own activities. And now with WhatsApp, you can WhatsApp them. And so it takes away from the isolation. And to your point, Wendy, what we figured is that we have to make teachers the local leaders and release their potential, so that we've got them to become advocates for girls' rights, so that they help girls to become self-advocates and they advocate with the community. And we have found that not just that, the students themselves to become leaders. So as you build the capacity to aspire, actually that's where the quality happens, and that's when then they start pulling in many other resources. They want to fix everything there is in the community to fix. They engage in campaigns, and all that, I think, is part of quality education. Because I can't agree with you more that we can't deal with it in isolation. And I think anyone who ventures into these areas figures that out very soon. That, hey, it's not only about what's happening in the classroom, it's about what's happening at home, in the community, and with policy as well. Because we are lucky, if you have good laws, then you call them to your aid when you need them.
Thank you for that, Urvashi. And I really like in the example of how you use technology that it's a way for the teachers to do things they want to do rather than someone else sending down content. And my institution is partly guilty in this respect. We put a lot of online courses up, and there's this assumption that if you just find the best teacher in the world, then everyone else can learn from them. It turns out it's actually much more useful to learn from the teacher around the corner who is an expert in the field, but who is much closer to your situation and using technology in that way. So I know Claudia wants to get back in. My suggestion would be, let's get a few quick reactions and then we'll go back to you.
First of all, thank you, an excellent panel. I want us all to sit and revisit the concept of scaling. I come from the developing world, and I think scaling is important. I think changing the world, I work for Ashoka, so we need to change the whole world. But I also like what you said. There was no pressure on you. When you started the project, you focus on what you did. The next year or 10 years ago, people came to you. You did not have a donor and a media and people around you. Are you scaling up? Do you have it in your plan? We're gonna crucify you if you don't. I mean, I really think we need to revisit this. Do we want the scale or do we want the impact? And I'm not saying that we should have either or. I'm just saying that we're getting too much into what I call, with all my love and a good heart, the fast food chain idea. It's like, let's have McDonald's everywhere. I don't disagree, and I know there are other things, and I know there are wonderful projects like yours, but we just need to revisit it and see how we can balance. Thank you.
Well, we'll take a couple more and then we'll come back to this. I think this is a really interesting contribution. So we had where's the mic? Here, and then we'll to the lady.
We are assuming the need of scaling up with the goal of providing educational opportunities with quality. But what do we understand on quality of education? I mean, it's a concept that we assume that is there, but we really do not take the time to define it correctly. The second question that I have is regarding precisely what the representative of the World Bank mentioned. Like, this is a matter of public policy. And therefore, in order to be realistic, also the political conditions to scaling up are necessary to be taken into consideration, particularly because the example of Teaching for America and the expansion in other countries show the difficulties of these kind of efforts given political challenges such as teachers' unions. That's what is the challenge, for example, for teaching in Mexico or for teaching in Argentina, where unions are really fighting back efforts such as Teaching for America to expand this quality of opportunities.
One more contribution, the lady in the second row.
Hi, I'm from an NGO called Aflatun. I'm Anjali, and we are in 114 countries. In last 10, we are very young, 10 years old in 114 countries. So that was our idea of scale first, going to as many countries as possible. But for last 3 years, we feel if we want to be more scalable and sustainable, we need to partner with governments. And we are trying to integrate our program into the government curriculum. And we had an opportunity because most governments are now framing the national strategy for financial inclusion. So that's our entry point because we focus on social and financial education. So, but the challenge is, governments are taking it up, it's becoming part of curriculum or a supplementary subject. But when it comes to investing in teachers' training, it becomes part of the curriculum. But when they have to train the entire country, the teachers in the entire country, they're not willing to do that. And that becomes a challenge for us. Where is quality and how will we measure impact? So that's what I want to know from your experience, what do you do in these cases?
So maybe we'll go back to Claudia and then open it to anyone.
I was very tempted to interfere with everybody, but with everybody's comment. I think to answer the three questions, we have to talk about some things like what is public policy and why is it so important? First, public policy has not the monopoly of scaling up. NGOs are necessary, civil society's organization in general, and the private sector is necessary. I don't know of any vibrant society where there is no private sector, including in education. Nobody would talk about higher education without the private sector, but even in other levels of education, including early childhood. Well, the first question on the pressure, impact, or scale. Both are important. Where is the role of the public sector? Where is the role of limited in numbers initiatives, but that have a deep impact? Normally, the public sector is very good at the horizontal approach. So we deal with big numbers. But we are not very good in what needs to be customized. Let me give you some short examples in education. We are not very good with children with intellectual disabilities. Because although special education happen in many cases, I had wonderful partners, and the World Bank has wonderful partners in special education, because with NGOs, that do great job on that. We are not very good with reaching out for children in conflict areas, in specific areas, with nomadic children. With the Roma children, we have great partners. For example, building kindergartens that target specifically the Roma children and prepare them. Sorry, I haven't, and I will continue quickly. I was the last one in the 2 rounds. The question that was posed on political conditions. Yes, to define quality education, there is not one definition of quality education. Why? Because people think differently. So we need an operational definition of quality. And my operational definition is based on what is in SDG 4. So we need to know if kids are learning or developing cognitive skills. As Rebecca has stressed, we know how to compare basic literacy, we know how to compare mathematical reasoning and science. And if you developing a research kind of mind, which is the basis for science. So if you work with these 3 that are the base, are necessary for history, are necessary for arts, are necessary for our other areas, it would be a kind of a good operational definition of quality education. Sorry, I will go to the last point.
Claudia warned me that I might have to cut her off occasionally, so I'm not going to do that. But
okay. So on the financial education question, and when dealing with that, you said, how can we have quality if we don't invest in training the teachers on the curriculum that was approved? That is also my question. There is no quality possible if we don't invest in training teachers. But we do invest a lot of money in training teachers. It's not a matter of money. Most governments invest and waste a lot of money training teachers in the wrong things. First, pre-service education. In many countries, it's about, I promise to finish in this phrase. In many countries, it's about just giving them a basic humanities course on sociology of education, history of education, psychology of education, but not teaching them a craft. How do you teach children? So after years of learning those things, they are in front of a classroom of 40 adolescents, and they don't know what is the adolescent mind, and they don't know how to teach. So this needs to be changed. And they are not taught to the curricula that exist in that, curriculum that exist in the country, and that eventually, as Rebecca has stressed, is irrelevant. Thank you.
So any super quick additions?
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly respond to your question and about the teacher training, right? And I think you're very right. In fact, that's one of the biggest dangers of quickly moving an innovation to the center and institutionalizing, quote unquote, because then in large numbers, the governments normally fail in doing this. In terms of teacher training, I think India has a similar problem as many of our countries, that the teacher training institutes lack the expertise that they should have, which is why, once again, and I'm selling hard, is the video option. that in terms of, we tried this with 70 teacher training institutes where we gave them videos of good teaching practices of the same government mandated curriculum. And we had them show it to their student teachers. And all our material is open source on YouTube. And after that, the most hits we've had have been from the student teachers, because for once they saw a real high quality classroom in action. So you couldn't take them to the classroom, but you brought the classroom to them with very simple, usable technology. So I would advise that course to be put on.
I mean, a number of the comments, yours, I guess just brought me back to the question of really what does it take to spread innovation? Because no doubt we all feel, as much as what you're saying is true about like the limitations of everyone feeling pressured to scale, we all probably feel a moral imperative to figure out how do we impact many, many more kids. And I guess I wonder how many people here have actually themselves tried to spread an innovation, like to get, like how many, I mean, I'm curious, like have tried to get the government, okay. So let me ask you all, I guess in our experience, the way to do this is to essentially find your allies. You're going to get a lot of no's, but it doesn't matter. You need one yes. You need to find the circumstance where you have a union leader who's like, actually, gotcha. I'll work with you or I won't oppose you. Like you're looking for a few people who share your objectives and are willing to help you. Now, think about that. What does that tell us? To me, that tells us, let's figure out how to create more of those people. Like, how are we going to get to the world where we've got more than one person in a country who is likely to say yes? Like, we need lots of those people. And that is, I mean, I'm again just making the point, like, in every other sector, we invest in leadership development. We do not do it when it comes to figuring out how are we going to ensure opportunity for our most marginalized kids. And we'll keep saying, oh, that's nice. That's a nice point. It sounds so great, leadership development, but we will not prioritize it unless we really realize that actually there is no other path. There is no other path. Is there any other path to seeing innovation spread in a greater way, given that all of our experiences are so similar? I don't think so. So I just think, I think there's a lot we could do if we decided to take that seriously. And it's not just about, I mean, I think Teach for All organizations can play a piece of it, but I think there's a lot else that we would need to do to really act on that insight.
Great. So let's get a few more reactions. There's a gentleman over there.
My name is Chris Miyaki from the National Universities Commission of Nigeria. This is a very erudite panel. We've looked at all the various dimensions of innovation and quality. But at the risk of inviting Claudia back, you know, to speak in, there's one aspect that always, caught my imagination: the role of the family. You know, the role of the family. I grew up, by the time I was 8, I'd lost both parents. But my grandmother, who had never been to school, placed a premium on my education, and that's why I'm here today. So if I ask the panel, what advice do you have for modern families? You know, because I believe that the culture of scholarship, the culture of innovation are rooted in family values. What would you advise the modern family? Thank you.
That's a great question. So we'll do Nadine. There's a lady in the back there.
We actually don't separate, we don't differentiate between scaling and impact. We put them together. So what we talk about is scaling impact. So some of that will be, you know, we have sort of theories on this, and we have programs where we help people think through their own scaling strategies, like Urvashi and Philipp have just passed through. But some of what we think about is that some of it is about scaling organizations, and sometimes it's getting to that critical direct impact point so that you become a magnet and others come to you, such as what happened with Wendy. So there's some of that until you get to a point where we talk about sort of indirect impact, that others begin to want to copy you, involve you in government policy and the rest. And I think I think that's another helpful framework to think about, that sometimes you need the scale, you need maybe it's not the McDonald's model, it's some kind of model, branching or whatever it is, getting videos out there. And then to a certain extent, you have to become magnetic and attract others to you to cause that indirect impact others to uptake the idea so that it becomes a new norm, and then it becomes irreversible, so that, you know, having access to schools is a norm. It has to happen. And we would like for all of these other things like leadership development has to happen. And then, you know, it's not questioned anymore after that.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mercedes. I'm from Argentina. I used to work at the government, at the Ministry of Education, and my question is, how can we from the government help to scale up? It has been for me a very big challenge to actually get to understand and speak the same language. I think like we both need to meet halfway. So what are your insights on a government perspective?
Great question.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Al-Haider, and I am the founder of Takallam for Human Development. Thanks for the insights that you all have been giving us. The discussions got me thinking too, why are we looking at children with sympathy as they are broken, helpless, rather than looking at them with empathy as they are full of potential and whole, and really empower them rather to just go and help them?
I wanted to come back to Aman's comment, and I think you picked up on it, Nadine, a bit. But the comment about the pressure, like, is there a downside to trying to scale too quickly or only thinking about scale when you're starting an intervention? And I think what I've noticed, at least, happening is a couple of things. One, there's a lot more talk for some years now, but it's coming much more forcefully to the education space about impact investing for education. So that's a very different way, and I see some folks in the room who do that, of looking at how you can scale innovation. And of course, if you're an investor, you're looking on a return for investment, and you're looking on it within a certain period of number of years, and that's an interesting thing to explore, I think. But that sort of philosophy has, I think, crossed over a little bit into what used to be just sort of philanthropic, charitable giving. And there's a lot of talk now about sort of results-based financing. I mean, Claudia, you might want to speak to this. It's a big thing now at the World Bank. And one of the things that I'm wondering, and we're starting to see a little bit, we don't have a definitive sort of thought around it, but if you do sort of as a grant, results-based financing, there is almost a disincentive for implementers to try to just grab the easiest kids and do it the quickest way and not invest in core capacity that would actually allow you a little bit more time and be more effective and sustainable in the long run. So I think there's actually a lot behind your question, a lot of dynamics, and I think donors and funders in the financing community in education, which includes governments, need to sort through this, because I think it's complicated and things are over mixing when maybe they shouldn't mix. And one of the I saw recently, but when I was getting on the plane to come here, that actually the Ford Foundation, who has just done a sort of review of all their portfolio and how effective they've been, have just decided that they're going to put 40% of all their money into core support for organizations, because they used to do that. And in fact, they realized they ended up doing what you said, Nadine. They seeded all these organizations in different sectors that then built slowly over time, created movements, they became unstoppable, massive social change. And then they moved back a little bit more to sort of really much more outcomes-driven stuff. And they decided that was a mistake, and they're going back to some of this core support. Not to say that you don't want to have core support, doesn't mean you don't want outcomes. So I think you could have a mix. But I think it's an important topic that we need to think about much more in our field.
Nobody is looking at children as helpless. In fact, they're full of promise. And the problem is that no one is addressing their promise or helping them to achieve that. In fact, we believe that the goal is to release the self. And in terms of girls, and to build the capacity to aspire. And once you do that, they become the leaders and the drivers of the innovation and the progress that we want. In terms of families, I couldn't agree with you more that, so in our program, what we do is that we build into the teacher training. How will you work with with families. You will work with children, of course, and help children become self-advocates. But how will you work with families and include them in the whole process so that then you're creating a larger community of teachers, learners, and a larger universe of care, which I think ultimately is the goal of what we want, right? And to your comment on governments, in fact, that was my whole, that actually governments are the largest scaling. They have the problem of trying to deliver, and they receive so much bashing, which they deserve, is of trying to, reach to educate at large scale. They have no choice. They have to do it. And there the problem is the management structures. Recently, I've been working with Rajasthan, and this whole school reform movement is going to achieve 5 million children, the millions finally, right? And it's interesting how they have invested very heavily in leadership development. They have been able to synergize all the departments. And the reason it's probably going to work, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed, governments being what they are, that there is a huge political will and commitment to achieve quality at large scale. And the scale is huge. It's 5 million students, it's 50,000 schools.
Great.
As I heard your question on modern families, what they should do, I was tempted to speak for 2 hours. But I want to highlight one issue that we are living right now, which is the issue of the refugees. So there is a belief from some governments that refugees will be a disaster in their countries. And I was in Dubai the day before yesterday in the launching of a report where they were talking about a reform that was done in London, and an area of London where education was much better than expected. And then suddenly they said, well, but because this is an area of refugees, and refugees put a lot of pressure on their kids because their only hope is education. And so I saw refugees appearing as pressure for quality education coming from the families. Let's think about it, because this might be true. I'm a daughter of refugees. And everything that I heard from my parents is education, nobody can steal what you have in your mind. So that you better dedicate yourself to your school. What you're learning. On leaders, I truly, that was
Claudia,
a question.
Can I ask you to respond also to the question about the ministry? Because I think you have...
Yes,
but you
not
can't,
on
you,
leaders.
You can't answer all of the questions.
Okay, I'll save the leaders for you. I wanted to say...
The panel is taking over.
No, I'm sorry, but I cannot listen to about leadership. I think everything in transforming the world is about leadership. Leadership in all levels. Leadership in the government, leadership in the NGO, that wants to transform the world, leadership in the principals, and leadership in the classroom, in the leadership of the teachers. Because at the end of the day, I'll come to that. That's my conclusion. Leadership of the teachers, because at the end of the day, it's the teachers that deliver classes that transform people's lives. And if the teacher doesn't feel that she is a leader, she won't transform everybody's life. And then it comes his question on let's not pity the children, let's develop empathy with them. And I fully agree. We have to tell students or empower students so that they perceive that they are protagonists of their own life, and we have to have a method of teaching that put them at the center as responsible for their own life. And this is feasible, I can assure you. Last but not least, the Argentinian lady, hi from Latin America. Yes, I was a civil servant, a federal civil servant in my country. And I had the same question that you had. And to answer this question, how can we solve this? Rebecca has answered, was building core capacity, investing building core capacity at the center, not only of the NGOs, but of the public organizations, so that not only dreams can be delivered, but that this is sustainable, because it's not good to have a program that depends on one person, and when this person is gone, it ends. So it's very important. I'll leave the rest for the others.
15 seconds. We have put at the heart of our work a commitment to student leadership. And just to quote, I mean, following on your question, the founder of Enseña Chile just stood up at our global conference and said, when you realize that the future president of your country is sitting in your classroom, you teach differently. And we're trying to produce teachers and leaders who are approaching their work in that way.
Okay, we'll get another round of questions, but I'm going to take the prerogative to add something to the question about how to work, what ministries, what governments can do, because I think there is another component that's very important. Big systems are like immune systems, and innovation is like an outside body. It's like a virus. And the big system doesn't understand the virus, and its normal response is to kill the virus because it looks different, it's surprising. And so I think it's really important for governments to create safe spaces where innovation can happen, where you don't try to measure, where you don't try to determine what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be successful. You give them a lot of support and freedom and let them evolve and kind of see what happens. Let many ideas bloom in a safe space, and often that safe space cannot be inside government. It has to be separate. But then stay involved, right? Stay supportive, and then when you find things that work, make sure you build links to the core of the national systems. I think that's really important. So we'll do another round. We have a question here.
My name is Shahida Salim, and I'm a social entrepreneur turned funder. So I've been on both sides of the fence here. And the question that I really have is on stages of innovation, especially when we're talking about scaling. So obviously there's that initial idea phase that needs a certain type of nurturing. But when we're talking about scaling, and some of the comments are really talking about, does it work, doesn't it work? But by the time we're ready to scale, shouldn't all of that have already been done? Shouldn't we already have figured the models out? And how do we separate these stages? Who's responsible for what? What role do you think, at what point in the stages of innovation is government important? I think it's at the scale end. And at what points do we need private sector or foundation support or donor support?
So I just think you are such wise women. And the reason why I think you're so wise is because I've been in many of these sessions and I've never heard people say leadership and core capacity. How do we amplify that message loud and clear? And the Support Foundation is leading that conversation a little bit. But goodness, can we amplify it in other ways? And Ashoka and everybody, we have a role to play. Leadership, core capacity.
My name is Frederick Odhiambo from Kenya. And I work with Poverty Transition Initiative. And I'm very happy to meet with you people. What I want to try to say, to ask me, I'm a former street boy, and now I'm changed. Somebody took me to stay with him I changed now I know how to speak English. Now I can talk with you people. And what I want to know, because I'm dealing with street children, because I come from there. So my dream, I don't want them to be like me. I want them to finish school, education. What we need materials, and about technology here is good. Can I welcome you after this conference? I want you to come in Kenya to show them how they can continue to their education. It's
Great.
Good?
I think they all agreed to come to Kenya.
Thank you.
Quickly, my name is Asif Salem from BRAC. I think one of the my quick comment would be Millions Learning had some sneak preview of some of the chapters looking really good, looking forward to that. We ran a study on successful scaling opportunities from Social Innovation Lab in South Asia, because there has been a number of scaling that has happened on that part. That we are coming up with a Stanford Social Innovation Review special issue in February, so watch out for that. But my question is more for Claudia, is one of the things you mentioned that we can't work without the governments. We need to work with it, which is absolutely very important. But seeing so many, now that we are focusing on quality going forward, seeing so many initiatives in countries after countries failing or not working, particularly in terms of quality aspect, can we put all our eggs in the government basket? Or rather, should we also invest in strong civil society leadership so that organizations like BRAC can also be developed in other countries as well, so that it can also almost create a parallel service delivery structure so that there is competition within the service delivery as well? So I think that's a question we should explore.
Love the last question. Look forward to the answer. I will just say, I think the only path to ensuring what you want to see in Kenya will come from within Kenya. Like, I think there's something that we might all be able to contribute, but none of that will get the street kids in Kenya to where they have the potential to be. So the real question, I think, is how do you ensure, like there's a generation of Kenyans right now coming out of college and there's a feeding frenzy for their energy. And all those banks and consulting firms and technology firms, they're all trying to get their energy. Let's get some of those folks to work with the street kids because they'll make a difference with the street kids, but also they will be fundamentally transformed. They'll never leave the work. They'll figure out, okay, how do we create different schools? How do we take some of the pressure off of schools? Like, we need to create a generation of leaders in Kenya who will take it on, and we're working with some folks in Kenya who are trying to make that happen, which is exciting.
Very quickly, I haven't said that government is the only, or put all your eggs in government. I just said that if you really want to scale up in numbers, you have to work with public policy. And that just NGOs won't make, but just government won't make it either. I gave even the example of areas where. But my answer to your question would be very blunt. Government, you made the suggestion of civil society leaderships. This is the answer to make government work well. If you don't have civil society leaders pressing or showing alternatives to government service delivery models, you won't have governments working well. So invest in private, in civil society leadership to put pressure on governments, which was her first approach. Thank you.
So I want to respond to that as well, that with a real example, that I think really eventually the government has to play a very important role because that's the one body that will go to places that nobody else will go to, and that has the mandate, and we can't let them off the hook. So they take our tax money, they're supposed to do this, so they're going to do it. The point is that what the government needs, and that's what Rajasthan is doing, they have reached out to every private partner they can. British Council, UKERI, Boston Consultancy Group for Management and for Leadership Training, UNICEF, NGOs like us, other organizations. And the point is that help us build capacity. You help us train. You show us how to manage. You help us build curriculum. You show us how to use technology. And that is eventually going to build, I think, if anything, if they succeed, that's how they will succeed. What it needs is for civil society to be pressing government to be more responsive to private initiatives and to partner them and not to be like the immune system that keeps rejecting them. I think that's important with that.
I wanted to come to your final question of how do we amplify these messages, and it's just an invitation. All of these lovely folks on the panel have been engaged with the Millions Learning Project and a number of others, some of you in the room, Brack and many others. we really want it to spark a discussion. So the report will be launched in March, but really I'm inviting all of you, if you want to partner with us to roll this out in your country, if you want to have ideas of how we can help you get the messages to the right stakeholders, governments, donors, whatever, please do. We're very, very open to doing that, and please do email me. All right,
so
thanks.
the only thing I want to do is thank the panelists for a really fantastic discussion and thank all of you for the passion and the questions.